Why exactly do we use EQ when making or mixing music? Well, we don't always want the full frequency range of every instrument in our mix. And EQ can help us sculpt the sound image, boost what is desired, and cut what is not. With EQ, you can bring the best out of each instrument, make sure that different instruments don't clash and muddy up the overall sound, and finally, you can use EQ to add the right color to your music. We use EQ to control the frequency spectrum of a piece of audio. But what is frequency? It's a function of air vibrations. When you pull a guitar string, for example, it vibrates and creates rapid changes in air pressure, or what we call sound wave. The number of sound wave cycles per second is the frequency of the string, and we measure it in units of hertz. The frequency is what determines the pitch that we end up hearing. The human frequency hearing range is approximately 20 Hz to 20 kHz, and it differs from one person to another depending on age, ear structure, and how many loud parties you've been to. Every instrument plays a certain range of frequencies that defines its sound, and along with other elements like timbre, distinguishes it from other instruments.
Now let's just talk about two different types of EQ that people that are generally considered, which is additive and subtractive. Now that's pretty self-explanatory. Additive EQ is boosting frequencies. Subtractive EQ is attenuating, which means reducing frequencies, okay? Now, you'll hear people say that wider Qs are better for boosting and narrow Qs are better for subtractive. That's a general rule of thumb, but I wouldn't necessarily stick with that completely. But I do use subtractive EQ quite a lot to get rid of anomalies, like I was talking about in my video of frequencies of music. I got into it a little bit.
This diagram shows you the difference between a wide bandwidth Q and a narrow bandwidth Q. The wide bandwidth Q has a center point of 3K or 3000 Hertz, and the narrow bandwidth has a center point of about 400 Hertz. As the arrow goes up, the gain increases. The arrow that goes downward, the gain decreases. So the narrow bandwidth EQ is a cut, and the wide bandwidth Q is a boost. So the narrower the Q, the less frequencies that are affected, and the wider the Q, the more frequencies that are affected.
So I'm going to play the guitar, I'm going to boost around, and then I'm going to cut anything out that I don't like, and I'll talk you through every step that I'm doing. It's actually just a technique where you just start with the cut. And the idea is that you start by cutting away a frequency, and then trying to find a place in the spectrum where you can make quite a big cut, and everything still sounds pretty good.
Guitar tone. When you think of your favorite guitar sounds, you're probably not thinking about it in solo. You're hearing it in the context of a song. Context is really important for getting the right guitar sound. In metal, the rhythm guitar needs the bass and the kick in order to have impact and to sound huge. The tools I'm going to use are pretty simple, just balance and EQ. Let's get started. Let's start with the initial balance. The kick, bass, and guitar need to find a good volume relative to each other. I'm looking for that perfect level where the energy of the guitars mesh with the body of the bass. Then I'm going to bring in the kick to emphasize those transients.
Okay, the next thing to know about are filters. Okay, there are four types of filters that we use for EQing. The first one is the high-pass filter, HPF. High-pass filter looks like this. That's kind of a diagram. It's basically, it lets high frequencies pass through, but we call it a low cut. Okay, that's the other name for it, low cut. Okay, this is the cutoff frequency here. Let's say that could be 80 Hertz. And this slope can be go down minus 12 dB or minus 24 dB typically. But the cutoff frequency, you can move it back and forth. It might be at 40, it might be at 20, it could be up at 500 Hertz or whatever. Everything else will be attenuated, whatever you have it set to, the slope. The low pass filter, LPF, is really a high cut, and it looks like this. That's why the slope goes down. It's cutting off high frequencies. Cutoff frequency, let's say the cutoff frequency here is 6K. That means anything above 6K will go down either if it's set at minus 12 dB slope or minus 24 dB slope. it's to your choosing, but that's typically how those are. Bandpass filter. Basically, a bandpass filter is a combination of a low and high pass filter. You got two cutoff frequencies, two different slopes, self-explanatory. And then there's a notch filter or band rejection filter. Notch filter looks like this. I was talking about one of my videos, the 4K notch, that people that have hearing damage that are musicians, they have the 4K notch. That means that frequency there would be 4K, 4 kilohertz. That would be the center point. So this is the stop frequency here. This is the band pass, so everything here gets through, everything here gets through, but at 4K, if that's our center point, it could be anywhere. Everything at 4K will be attenuated, whatever that dB is. Let's say that's minus 18 dB, then everything will get attenuated down to minus 18 dB. And the Q, okay, how narrow or that can be set. Typically, with notch filters are there to notch out really, really specific frequencies. That's why you use them. That's why they're called notch filters. They're typically very tight Qs. Those are filters. Next, distorted electric guitars. I'm talking about distorted electric guitars because clean electric guitars, it really depends on the sound. If you're going through a Fender Deluxe or Fender Twin or through a Vox AC30 and there's just a little bit of grit on it or they're perfectly pristine clean, it all depends on the song that you're playing to. So you can't give any hard and fast rules. With distorted electric guitars, even if you're using them in a film scoring instance, I'm usually going to high pass filter the guitars around 50 hertz or so. There's not a lot of information except for mud down below there, and it's going to make your mix much clearer by doing that. Woofy buildup. If people are palm muting and doing something like that for heavy rock, typically that's going to be between 140 and 150 hertz. You're going to have you'll see a big spike. And if you EQ that out, I'll spot EQ those spots and you'll reduce them down and you'll have a lot more control of your sound. I never compress distorted electric guitars because they're already compressed. Your mid-range in your guitar, it really depends on the guitar sound that you get and what kind of amp you're doing. Sometimes people want to cut their mids. Sometimes they want to boost their mids. You know, if you're using Marshalls and you want a big fat mid-range sound that kind of grabs you, you might be boosting in one of these areas. But like I said, it really depends on the sound. But your top end of your guitar is going to be around 3 or 4K. That's going to make your guitars jump out of the mix and be really aggressive sounding for the heavier rock and for metal. That top end is 3 and 4K. A lot of times there's a high-end fizz that you're going to want to filter out. Sometimes I'll filter out up above 8K. Really, once again, depends on the sound. Sometimes I'm boosting at 10K, just to get some more brilliance out of it. But so it's, once again, I can't make any hard and fast rules, but these are generally areas that I am going to be looking at on distorted electric guitars. Acoustic guitar, once again, you can't really generalize.
Together. Rather than look at each track's EQ, let's think about them all as one sound. The lowest frequencies, like 0 to 80 Hz, will be taken by the kick and bass. Let's say in a song that I want the kick to take the lowest frequencies, and the bass will be above that. So the kick will dominate the 50 Hz, and the bass will live around 80 to 120 Hz. 150 to 250 Hz is where the low end of the palm mute hits, so the guitar can take priority there. Guitar is a mid-range instrument, so that 500 to 1500 Hz area is going to be where it lives. Guitars have a lot of harshness in the upper mids, but that's the presence frequency for the bass. From 3000 to 4500 Hz, the bass takes priority. The bass will roll off from there, and the guitar will take priority again. The guitar's presence frequency is around 5000 to 7000 Hz. Then the rhythm guitars will start to roll off, leaving the kick to fill in the high end. Now, obviously, microphone selection, tuning, shell material, string material, and a ton of other things can change all of these values. This is a basic starting point, but if you approach the rhythm section with this kind of intent, it will be way cleaner and sound huge easily.
This is usually what that is, and a lot of times you'll get a lot of really harshness, some plastic sounding, so a lot of times people will get rid of that area. Obviously, everything sounds worse when we zero it out, but if I scope through, you'll see that that's kind of more of the problem area.